Hello, and welcome to the Excerpt. I'm Dana Taylor. In 5 short days, we are officially off to the races. The gates at the iconic Kentucky Derby will officially open on May 4th, marking its 150th anniversary. This storied American tradition features horses with braided tails, jockeys in silk shirts, festive ladies' hats, and the signature mint julep at the historic Churchill Downs racetrack. The annual Run for the Roses race is the longest continually held sporting event in North America. Last year, the race was mired in controversy after several horses died in the preceding weeks. Will this year's race be less contentious, more exciting? What will we all be talking about come Saturday? Journal Courier-Journal sports reporter Jason Frakes and lifestyle reporter Kirby Adams join us now to dig into all of this. Thanks for joining me, Jason and Kirby.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you. Happy Derby.
Well, before we start, just a quick note to our viewers who are joining us on any of our social platforms to please feel free to comment or ask any questions you have there. If you could please put your first name and where you're joining us from too, that'd be great. And then we'll take some time at the end to ask those questions for you. Okay, let's get right to it, Jason. You've been covering the Derby now for 18 years. Last year's race had a huge cloud hanging over it with 12 horse fatalities in the days and weeks leading up to the race. That kicked off an investigation as to whether something about the track at Churchill Downs was to blame. What did they find, and are we anticipating a similar situation this year?
Well, they're certainly hoping not to have a similar situation this year. They did investigate, and they determined that there was no single factor that they identified as a potential cause. There was no discernible pattern detected to link the fatalities. Churchill Downs made the unprecedented decision to actually close the track after the Kentucky Derby, and they actually moved the rest of their meet a couple hours away to Ellis Park. And they have introduced some new safety initiatives to try to alleviate this problem. As far as how often a horse can race, if a horse has had poor performances, they can't race again for a while. So they are trying some different things. The surface has changed a little bit. It's gone down to every detail as far as checking for rocks and things like that. Anything that could lead to any sort of incident. So they're doing their best, but they will be holding their breath this year as far as knowing that the spotlight is back on them.
Jason, what do you see as the predominant themes in this year's race?
Well, obviously, it's the 150th Kentucky Derby. It started back in 1875. So that's a huge moment for this event. It's a huge moment for the city and the state of Kentucky. The spotlight's going to be on them, and then one of the big themes this year, or one of the big storylines, if you will. Bob Baffert, who's won this race 6 times, tied for the record for the most by any trainer. He's not in the race for the 3rd straight year. He's been suspended by Churchill Downs since Medina Spirit. Since Medina Spirit crossed the finish line first in 2021, was later disqualified for failing a drug test. That's been a big controversy. There were some lawsuits this year trying to get one of his horses into the race, and the Kentucky Court of Appeals ultimately struck that down. So there will be no Bob Baffert in this race for the 3rd straight year.
And staying with you, Jason, the most exciting 2 minutes in sports, as they say, is just a couple of days away now. It's a few days away. Can you tell us more about the significance of the 150th year? How will it be different this year than in years past?
Well, it's still going to be a 2-minute horse race, so that hasn't changed. There definitely is a little more hype around it, if you will. One of the more significant things that I've found, well, a couple of things. Every year a gold trophy is given to the winner. They've added a little bit to that trophy this year to make it a little more special. with it being the 150th Derby. They don't really talk about how much the trophy is worth. The Churchill Downs will tell you it's priceless. But if you're just looking at it in its own weight in gold, it weighs about 68 ounces, made of 14 karat gold. If you just put that weight in gold, it's about $158,000 right there, just with the gold. And you add the emeralds and rubies that adorn the trophy, and that really bumps up the price of it. The other thing, this is the first year that the purse for the race is $5 million. That's up from $3 million since 2019. So they have bumped up the value of the race itself, if you will. And what's that mean for the winner? Well, last year the winner Mage, their owners got $1.86 million for winning the race. This year the winner will get $3.1 million. So a big increase there in the overall purse for the Kentucky Derby.
Jason, as always, the race is taking place in the city of Louisville, where you're based. How many people are you expecting, and what's the overall impact of the event on the economy?
Well, it is hard to predict the crowd. The attendance for the race peaked in 2015. There were about 170,000 people that year. Since COVID, that number has kind of dipped. Last year, it got back to about 150,000, so still 20,000 less than the peak year. A lot of that will depend on the weather. We've heard different forecasts for Saturday. If it's a beautiful day, with it being the excitement of the 150th Derby, I think maybe we can get closer to that 170,000 record. Ever since COVID, a lot of attendance at all kinds of events has been affected by that. But I think if it, on a perfect day with perfect weather, we could see 160, 170,000 people at Churchill Downs for the Derby. As far as the economic impact, I've seen estimates as much as $400 million on the local economy. You're talking about the hotels and the restaurants and all that kind of stuff. Probably not included around is the little cottage industry around the track. A lot of people rent out their homes. A lot of people park cars in their yards and sell food and things like that. So it's its own little sort of community around the track, which is another cool part of the Derby.
This is a race, of course. Jason, let's talk about this year's horses. Which ones are the top picks for insiders, and which ones are the fan favorites?
Well, the draw was Saturday, and they set the morning line for that. And the favorite is Fierceness. He's the 5-2 favorite, which means if you bet $2, you get $7 back on a $2 win bet. He won the Florida Derby by 13 and a half lengths, which is an incredible margin. He is without a doubt the fastest horse in the race. And if he runs like he did in the Florida Derby, I think it's pretty safe to say that nobody is going to beat him. He is a worthy favorite. He's trained by Todd Pletcher, who's won this race twice already, with Super Saver in 2010 and Always Dreaming in 2017. So if you do the math there, another 7 years, it's 2024. So maybe it's his turn once again. The second favorite, his name is Sierra Leone. He's 3-1 in the morning line. He's the second choice, trained by Chad Brown. Now, this horse has all the pedigree. He was sold for $2.3 million as a yearling. He's the most expensive horse in the race. The one knock on him is that he's a late runner. He's going to be really far back early, and he's going to have to pass 18 or 19 horses when he's coming for home. So that's always a dangerous thing in the Kentucky Derby. A couple of the longer shots that people are talking about. One is West Saratoga, trained by Larry Demerit. He's the first black trainer in the Kentucky Derby in 35 years. He's from the Bahamas. He's also West Saratoga is also the only gray horse in this race. And then Honor Marie, trained by Whit Beckman, a local guy, grew up in Louisville in the Derby for the first time. So there's going to be a lot of local support for him.
This year, as in the recent past, the Derby precedes the other two races in the Triple Crown, the Preakness Stakes, and the Belmont Stakes. The last time a horse won the Triple Crown was 6 years ago. Do we have any viable contenders for the crown in this year's Derby?
We talked about fierceness, and I think he's the best 3-year-old in the country right now. The one knock on him is he's raced 5 times in his career. He won, he lost, he won, he lost, he won. So following that pattern, it looks like he's set up for a loss in this race. But he definitely has the talent to do it. I think Sierra Leone has the talent to do it. One thing about the Triple Crown this year, you're talking about, as we mentioned, Bob Baffert will not be in the Kentucky Derby. So he has a couple of horses who are really good, who he's waiting, excuse me, he's waiting to enter in the Preakness. So whoever wins the Kentucky Derby will be facing some new blood in the Preakness and a couple of really good Bob Baffert trained horses. So that could really make it difficult to see a Triple Crown winner this year.
Just a reminder that we're going to be taking audience questions a little later. So if you're joining us on social, please post your first name, where you're joining us from, and what you would like to know. We're speaking with Courier-Journal's sports reporter Jason Frakes and lifestyle reporter Kirby Adams. Kirby, you've been covering all things Derby beyond Churchill Downs for over 20 years now. This is the first year there's an official style guide. What are this year's hot fashion trends?
Well, I have to say, every year the Kentucky Derby is a big fashion show. It's a horse race and it's a fashion show. And this has been going on since 1875. In the very first Kentucky Derby, people were encouraged to come to the racetrack and be dressed to the nines. Now, what that meant back then is much different than what it means today. But you find that people really start to think about what they're going to wear to the Kentucky Derby sometimes as soon as the last Kentucky Derby is over with. So it's all about the hat. Everybody wants to wear a hat, and that's been going on again since 1875. Even in the 60s and 70s, when hats fell out of fashion for everyday wear, people kept wearing them to the Kentucky Derby.
And what are some of the other things that happen off the racetrack that are part of this cultural fabric of our country that happen at this event?
Well, one of the things that happens is, like I said, with the fashion, there are so many fashion shows and hat shows around Louisville. You can't go to a hotel downtown without finding a milliner, that's someone who makes hats, without finding a milliner who is set up in the lobby and selling hats. It's like the whole city downtown has turned into Derby Central. We also have something called the Kentucky Derby Festival, which starts 2 weeks ahead of the Kentucky Derby. And the festival was really created back in the 60s as a way for the whole community to be involved, even if you weren't going to the racetrack. So we have parades, we have balloon races, we have a running race, which I just took part in on Saturday. There's a half marathon and a full marathon, and thousands of people show up for that from all over the country. We have, there's spelling bees. The Courier-Journal started a spelling bee one year. There's bed races, believe it or not. People build these weird contraptions and race them around and inside of Freedom Hall, which is an indoor arena. So there's something for everybody. Outdoor concerts and chow wagons. There's even a great big, very impressive steamboat race that happens the week of the Kentucky Derby, where 2 large antique steamboats race each other down the Ohio River. So it's lots of fun, lots going on. It's hard to do it all, so you kind of pick your favorites.
Kirby, the Derby, like many prestigious events, has a red carpet. What big names are we expecting to see this year?
Well, I'm glad you asked, because I've been digging that up for a couple of weeks. It's always kind of a big secret, and then slowly but surely you start to hear. And Jason's even been filling me in on some of the people that I didn't know about. But so we have celebrity galas the night before the Kentucky Derby, and those that's Kentucky Oaks is run on Friday, and then that night is called Derby Eve. So some of the big Derby Eve galas include the Barnstable Brown Gala, which has been going on for 35 years. It's rated by Condé Nast as one of the 10 best parties in the world. It's held in Patricia Barnstable Brown's private home. It's like 3 miles from my house, so it's in a neighborhood. It's a big, beautiful home though. And she'll have Cole Hauser from Yellowstone there, Jack Harlow, who is a rapper who's from Louisville. Kid Rock will be there. Winona Judd, Aaron Rodgers. He has a whole posse of his football buddies coming along. They're going to be trading in their helmets and their shoulder pads for really beautiful suits, and they always have a great time. Some of these are repeats that come back year after year. Joey Fatone will be there, Smokey Robinson. And what happens at that party is all these performers jump up on stage and then start performing together, which is something like you're watching this thinking, I can't believe I'm seeing Travis Tritt and Joey Fatone and Peppa from Salt and Pepper all performing together. And it's like something you'll never see again. There's another big party that's put on by the Bridgman family. It's called the Trifecta. This will be the last year for that. But Bruno Mars is performing at that. Chris Tucker will be there. And also DJ E-Class will be there, and among others. And then there's another large celebrity gala called Unbridled Eve. And we know that Richie Sambora will be there from Bon Jovi, Mike Mills from REM. And there's always a group that comes year after year to that party, like Warren Moon, and just a bunch of people who find that's their favorite party. So that's going on all over the place. And then Jason told me that Travis Kelce will be here. Is that perhaps?
Not confirmed, but I have been hearing that. Yes.
I was told by somebody also that he's bringing him in as his personal guest. So we're all wondering if that means Taylor Swift is going to show up as well. You just never know who's going to come up for the Kentucky Derby. Probably Tom Brady will probably
have a tough time deciding, Kirby, which party you want to go to.
Well, it comes down to money. Like some of them you can't even get a ticket to. You have to be invited. Others, like I know the Trifecta, they sold out last week. Unbridled, I think they might have a couple of tickets left, but these parties all cost a lot of money. Several $100s to over $1,000 for a ticket. And then if you add that on to the price of going to the Kentucky Derby, it can be a very expensive weekend.
Kirby, I hear the signature Derby drink, the mint julep, is possibly being overtaken by a newcomer to the race this year. Tell me about that.
Oh, I'm so glad you asked that question. So I was with the master distiller from Woodford Reserve, and Woodford Reserve is the official bourbon of the Kentucky Derby. Her name is Elizabeth McCall, and she was telling me that last year the Woodford Reserve Spire almost overtook the Kentucky Derby favorite, which is the mint julep. The mint julep has been consumed at the Kentucky Derby since probably 1875. Now the Woodford Reserve Spire is making a run for the finish line. And I think it sounds pretty darn good because this mint julep is made with bourbon and simple syrup and muddled mint. And it can be a little, I don't know, to me, a little jarring. It's kind of like it was used as a medicinal drink back in the day. The Woodford Spire is made with lemonade, cranberry juice, mint, and bourbon. And both of them have lots and lots of ice. So that just sounds a little more refreshing. And I think if the rain stays away at the track on Saturday, then maybe that Woodford Spire will be the drink to consume. But responsibly.
Other than the Woodford Spire, what are you most looking forward to at this year's Derby, Kirby?
You know, I think the fact that it's the 150th and everyone has been so, I don't know, ramped up about it. I love to hear the national anthem singer come out. This year it's Winona Judd, and she'll perform. My friend Christine Moore, who's a milliner, who made this particular hat that I'm wearing right now, is making Winona Judd's top hat for that. It's fun for me to be working the red carpet and talking to the celebrities that come in, and particularly those who come in year after year, because a lot of them make it just an annual event, and they're happy to be back. It's not like they're walking the red carpet like at the Oscars. They really let their hair down and have a lot of fun. And I'm also looking forward to actually putting some money down on a horse that might win this year, because I've been so busy in the past few years that I haven't paid enough attention. And so I really was making notes when Jason was talking.
Okay, I want to try some rapid fire questions that some of our listeners might also be wondering about if you're both game.
Sounds good.
Okay.
Sure, go ahead.
Okay, here we go. Jason, why is it called the Run for the Roses?
Yeah, this actually goes back to about 1906. There's photos going back to then that even then they would give the winning horse some roses, a garland of roses, and then in 1925, a New York sports columnist actually coined the phrase "Run for the Roses," and now that garland of roses is a huge part of the event. A local grocery store, they make it. It's a public event to kind of go and see the garland of roses being created. There are 400 roses in it. The garland is about 13 and a half feet long and weighs about 40 pounds.
And Kirby, how did hats become a thing at the Derby?
Well, that goes back to 1875 when everybody wore hats. Women wore bonnets. They didn't just lay on their heads like this. They had big bows that they attached them with, and men wore hats too to all sorts of social when they went out, I guess. I wasn't around in 1875, believe it or not, but I believe everybody was wearing a hat when they went out and about. Women wore long gloves. Gloves did not stick around. But like I said, even in the 60s and 70s, when hats were no longer in fashion, in vogue to wear out to social occasions, people kept wearing hats to the Kentucky Derby. And I really think that it's because it makes it feel special and wonderful. And the Kentucky Derby hat is often very different than what like a woman would wear to Ascot or even to races out on the West Coast. We're more Southern Belle. We're a little bit, we maybe rather than being so very just elegant like like Ascot would be in England, it's more bright floral sundresses and bigger the better hat. And my warning about that, however, is if there's 170,000 people at the racetrack and you have a hat the size of the Titanic, you're going to have a really uncomfortable long day trying to get through the crowd. So that's why this is probably as big as I'll go.
Jason, where and when was the first known horse race?
Wow. Well, if you look at the history of horse racing, it goes back to ancient times before Christ, BC, the Greek Olympic Games. There are records of horse races being run, 700 BC. So there's a long history of horse racing. In the United States, it goes back to the 1600s. There are races in what's now the New York area. I think maybe if you're thinking about more what we see now as horse racing, you go back to about the 1800s in England and France, and that's the first time that there's really a record of prizes being awarded to winners of horse races. So I think that might be kind of a little bit of the more modern era. And then when you look at the 3 Triple Crown races, the Kentucky Derby, the Preakness, and the Belmont, the Belmont is actually the oldest of those 3 by about 8 years. The first Belmont was run in 1867, and then obviously the Kentucky Derby was first run in 1875. So when you're looking at maybe the more modern era and what we kind of think of now as horse racing, the mid late 1800s is sort of the genesis of all of that.
Then Kirby, what is the most talked about hat style at the Derby this year?
Well, that's a really good question because they're all over the map. There are 3 featured milliners for the Kentucky Derby. These are hat makers who have been chosen by Churchill Downs to exemplify what hats should look like. I am wearing one that would be considered more elegant. There are others that their style is big, wild feathers, and then we have some that I call it wacky fashion. People who come in hats that are made with, like a track going around them with a horse that they can remotely control. It's like, so it's all over the map what people wear. But I do think the most important piece of advice for anybody going to the Kentucky Oaks or the Kentucky Derby is to wear what makes you feel fabulous and wear what makes you feel like fun, because that's what it is.
Kim, we have to know, which horse are you putting your money down on? I'll start with you, Jason.
My pick to win the 150th Kentucky Derby is a horse named Just a Touch. Now, you haven't heard me talk about him yet. We talked about Fierceness and Sierra Leone being the favorites, but I'm going with Just a Touch, trained by a Louisville native, Brad Cox. I feel like he's an improving horse, and he's ready to run the best race of his life when it matters the most, the first Saturday in May.
And then what about you, Kirby?
Well, first of all, Jason, you are a rock star. Thank you for knowing everything there is to know about horses and horse racing, because I love listening to you, because I'm so far on the other end of all this. So I'm going to make a note of that horse. I was going to say Catalytic, just because I like the name, and I also I liked his pole position. But then listening to you talking about Sierra Leone, I love a horse that runs from the back, because that's an exciting horse race to me. So maybe I'll put Sierra Leone, Catalytic, and Just a Touch in a box and hope that brings in the big money and I can get a new car or a fancy hat for next year.
Well, unfortunately, we are having some issues getting questions off of social media. I did want to get to those. But before I let the two of you go, Kirby, you've been going to these for over 20 years. What's the most unusual hat you've ever seen?
Well, the second year I went, and I moved here from Seattle, so I didn't really know much about Derby fashion or anything about the Kentucky Derby. So somebody gave me a hat to wear, and it got written up. This is before I worked for the Courier-Journal. It got written up as the best hat at the Kentucky Derby. So I think it was just because it was so big and feathery, and my co-host actually had to cut the feathers off of the side because they kept tickling him in the face. So I loved that hat because it sort of talked as I walked along. But other people have had much bigger, much more impressive hats since then, since I've been doing this for 20 years. But yeah, I would just say, everybody looks fantastic at the Kentucky Derby, and it's really hard to pin down just one. I will be doing a fashion story on Derby Day where I'm going and looking for the best fashion. So maybe I'll have to get back with you the answer to that after the 150th is run.
And Jason, you have 18 years at the Derby. What's been the most contested race?
Well, I guess it kind of depends on your definition of contested. As far as the closest races go, the smallest margin of victory that they use is by a nose. So if you win by a nose, that's as close as it could be. That's happened 9 times in the history of the Kentucky Derby. The last time was in 1996 when Grindstone beat Cavalier by a nose. Now, if you want to really get into contested, we can talk about the 2021 Kentucky Derby. Medina Spirit crossed the finish line first, but was disqualified for a failed drug test, and Mandaloon was named the winner of that Derby. And that decision was contested for about 2.5 years, if you consider all of the court cases and things that went along with that.
May 4th is the big day for the Kentucky Derby. Thank you both so much, Jason and Kirby, for joining me on the Excerpt.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching. I'm Dana Taylor. I'll see you next time.